They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry!
What's up, everyone? My name is Ethan. This is Courtside TV. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and let's get into it. So today, I wanted to talk about the NBA MVP award, and currently the race as it stands, and why I feel like it's kind of dumb to be even really talking about this right now. I heard a podcast today from The Ringer, and they were kind of talking about how it feels like this year specifically, and it's been trending this way for the past couple, we are talking about the MVP much earlier in the year than we otherwise would. Even before the All-Star game, before, we're only about 1/3 of the way through the season, we are, every single night on a nightly basis, it's like we're constantly reevaluating where the MVP race stands, without really taking into account that we're in the middle of February right now, smack dab in the middle of the NBA season. There's still plenty of games left to play, and we just have not had enough data to really accurately have an MVP conversation yet. Now, obviously, we can talk about who's the front runner and stuff, but I feel like we're writing off people completely and already crowning certain people when we know that there's a lot of season left to play, and so I kind of wanted to talk about that with a couple of the examples of guys that we've seen so far. So when discussing the MVP this year, people have kind of settled on a couple of different criteria that make somebody the MVP, right? You have to be on a winning team. We know that. That's been something that's been consistent throughout MVP awards. Really the only exception being the Russell Westbrook year. Even then they were a 6 seed, they were a playoff team, but usually the MVP comes on like a top 3 seed in your conference, and that wasn't the case that year, but pretty much every other year, at least in recent history, that has been the case where the MVP has been on one of the best teams in the league. So that's one thing, right? It needs to be on a winner. It needs to be statistical production. Obviously, you have to be leading your team in a lot of categories and clearly be contributing to, be one of the major reasons why any given team is, winning games, being a good team. And then there's the whole narrative aspect of it, and that's the part that I kind of dislike the most, honestly, is the whole narrative MVP. And this is something that I've wanted to make a video on in the past, and never quite got around to doing it. Maybe I'll do it in the future. It would be a little bit of a bigger project. I would need some more time to really script that all out. But people in the media saying that they're like a narrative-based voter and trying to push, certain narratives that don't have anything to do with how a player is playing and more to do with their circumstance or their age or something like that, right? Specifically for me, it's the whole LeBron is doing this at 36 years old. Now, if LeBron was having an MVP caliber season just based off his statistical production alone, which you can argue that he is, and he has had those seasons in the past, right? And this year, I don't think he has the best stats out of anybody. I certainly think that there's a lot of guys who would have an argument over him statistically, but the reason that LeBron isn't, one of the major factors in the MVP conversation for a lot of people is because he's 36 years old. For me, it just doesn't do it for me, man. Like, I don't care. The MVP, we don't give it to, it's not called the most valuable player relative to how old they are. That's not what the award is called. The award is called the most valuable player. It shouldn't matter if you're 36 or if you're 21, right? And on the other side of the coin too, we've seen people try, it's been part of Luka's case last year and going into this season. Wow, he's doing all of this at such a young age, so early in his career he's been able to do it. And I just don't think age should matter at all when we're talking about the MVP, right? If you have a case, then you should have a case regardless of how old or how young you are. In my opinion, I just don't think that should be something that we should look at, and that does bug me when looking at a lot of the media's takes on it, and a lot of fans kind of like to bring that up, the whole year 18, washed king, whatever. It's just a manufactured narrative, and none of it really should hold any weight when coming to talking about this award, and so that's the first thing that has bugged me about this conversation this year. And also the narrative thing was probably the main reason why Russell Westbrook got his, because of the whole triple-double thing, right? It's like, okay, he's averaging this statistic that nobody has done before, which is impressive in its own right, but I do think that there were players that season who were having just as good of a season statistically, but because of the novelty of the term triple-double, right? Like, it was kind of a thing where, wow, that's so cool that he's double digits in this. And I've talked about in the past how I think the triple-double is kind of a meaningless statistic, but that's a whole nother can of worms. The point is that triple doubles should not necessarily like give the award to him. And also the whole thing of, well, you know, Kevin Durant left and he was the guy who stayed, and this team was supposed to be really bad, but he's carrying them on his back. That was all a narrative about it, right? And that's just the thing that I dislike when it comes to MVP awards, because particularly that season, I know there was a really good case for James Harden, and there's a couple other players there that probably had a case for that one, that, you know, had just as good statistics or even better, and played on better teams. But because of the whole KD left and this is the triple-double king, it became impossible to not give it to Russ for a lot of people, which is something that I personally disliked at the time. And I still have some of those same feelings now. And then there's also been this double standard over the years of, well, we can't give it to these guys because he has another MVP player on his team, right? We had that specifically with Steph and KD during the 3 years that they were together. I think during those 3 seasons, there were times where both of them, I think, had pretty strong cases for the MVP award, but they basically were just removed from it before the season even began. Like, before those two ever stepped on the court together, it was like, okay, they're not going to win an MVP together because they're just both too good, and they both take away from each other too much, and neither of them can actually be the MVP because they're both too valuable to their team. Which, when you think about that, doesn't really make that much sense, right? How can, like, if it's the best team in the league and these two players are both obviously worthy of MVP consideration, in fact, they had both won it before even teaming up together, it doesn't make sense why now all of a sudden they should both automatically be taken out just because they're on the same team. And we've had this same argument over the past year and now this season with LeBron and Anthony Davis. This year, AD doesn't really have that much of an MVP case because he's not, you know, really performing up to the level we've seen him at. He seems like he's coasting until the playoffs, which is fine. But yeah, those two specifically where some people take them completely out of consideration, and some people have the double standard, right? Where the same people who said that Steph and KD weren't eligible are now hard campaigning for LeBron to win the award, which all I ask is that you remain consistent. You know, you can have a different opinion, but just make sure that it's the same every time, you know. So that's one thing that bugs me, is like the flip-floppy, just, you know, fitting whatever the person wants to believe, and saying, well, I like LeBron, so I think he should be able to win it, and I didn't like Steph and KD, so they shouldn't have been able to, when realistically it's a very similar scenario between the two. So that's the other thing of, those two guys should be ineligible for some people, but they aren't. So that's like, it's just interesting how, you know, how we quantify or how we qualify who should be able to win the MVP and who shouldn't be able to, just based on who their teammates are, which, you know, like I said, when you really think about that argument, it kind of makes less and less sense the more you really consider it. And this is the one thing that I really wanted to talk about, is the whole thing of, well, these guys' teams aren't winning, so they can't be in the conversation. And that's fine, right? Like, if the season ended today, you wouldn't really be able to give it to Jokic or Steph Curry or Damian Lillard or Luka, or let me just look at this. You wouldn't be able to give it to like Tatum or Jaylen Brown, or to you know, there's a lot of guys like Jimmy Butler, also Bam Adebayo, who are on teams that we thought were going to be really, really good, and so far might have like underperformed or had to deal with COVID stuff or dealt with injuries that have kept them out of games and stuff, right? You know, like all these teams that are underperforming right now wouldn't be eligible if the season ended today, just based on where they are seeding wise. And I wanted to talk about, particularly in the Western Conference, how it's kind of ridiculous to me how, like, guys who are on teams that are currently like 7th or 8th in the Western Conference are just straight up being thrown out of the conversation by some people because they haven't won enough games, which I've talked about this at length. The Western Conference is extremely razor close right now. Specifically, let's just take the example of Steph Curry and the Warriors, right? They're right now at the 8th seed. They are 2 games out of the 5 seed, and they're also 2 games out of the, what is that, the 10 seed? The 9th or the 10th seed? Or sorry, no, not even that. The like the 13th or 14th seed, excuse me. I was looking at it wrong. So they're like 2 games out of 5 and 2 games out of like 14, 13. So explain to me how, like, that can be used against somebody in an MVP conversation. And also with Jokic, who is right now 1 game ahead of Steph Curry in the standings. His team is 1 game ahead. These things can change so quickly. Like, they're 1 good week away from being the 4 seed, and they're 1 good week away from being out of the playoffs entirely. So if things can change so fast, how come we are like holding wins, like holding seeding against somebody in the conversation? Because, like, for all we know, any of these teams could end up being the 3 seed by the end of the year. It's not the end of the season right now. We're 1/3 of the way through. There's still plenty of time left to go. So, like, I just, like, obviously wins should be part of the MVP thing. I completely agree with that. Like, you should be on a really good team to be able to win the MVP. Like, obviously we're not going to give it to Jeremy Grant. Like, even though he's putting up really good stats, the Pistons are horrible. Same thing with Bradley Beal, who's putting up great stats. The Wizards just aren't winning games right now. But for teams that are, like, in the playoff hunt, and especially in the Western Conference, guys that are, like, in the thick of the thing. Like, right now the Warriors are sitting at the 8th seed. The Nuggets are at 7th. Either of those teams wins 3-4 in a row, they're like all of a sudden the 4 seed. So, like, how can this be, like, how can just in this moment in time we say, hey, this guy's not winning enough games to be the MVP, when we haven't seen what their final record's going to be, and we're still a very long ways away from that. So I just have a hard time using things like that against these players, just because, like, currently they might be a low playoff seed. They're very, very close to being a higher one, and they probably will be a higher one by the time things are said and done. So I don't know, man. So honestly, I'm sure a lot of people might be thinking right now, like, well, who's your pick for MVP? Who do you think should win the award? And I'm not even gonna give an opinion on that right now, because I just feel like it's too early. Like, There are guys who are certainly in the conversation for me. I think Joel Embiid has had a really good season so far. I would give him some consideration if it ended right now. Steph Curry has done a lot for the Warriors. They would be horrible without him. Similar deal with Jokic. He's put up great statistics, and while the team isn't super amazing from a record standpoint, we know what the Nuggets are capable of. I think LeBron, even though I dislike the age thing, I think his stats are good enough to be in the conversation probably. You can talk about Kawhi Leonard, who is on a really good Clippers team, and he's putting up nice stats, and he's played a lot of games too. Normally we're used to Kawhi load managing, but he's been available for a lot of them. You should talk about the Jazz, who are the best team in the league right now, whether that's Donovan Mitchell, who has been putting up great offensive numbers, or Rudy Gobert with his defensive impact. There's a lot of guys out there who I think probably should be in the conversation right now, and that's just something about this particular season where there wasn't really a clear MVP frontrunner going into the year. I think for a lot of people it was probably Luka, and to this point the Mavericks have been underwhelming, and he hasn't been as amazing as some people probably thought he was going to be. So if you take Luka out of it, you're really just splitting hairs between a lot of the top candidates. So my advice, and probably how I'm going to take this, is let this play out even more. I really don't even want to call the MVP race until the season is completely over. And side note, I think the NBA should announce it before the playoffs. Like, they should announce the MVP before the first round begins, because for the last, like, what has it been, like 4 years, like since the Steph Curry MVPs, pretty much all these guys have lost, like, in the first, second, or conference finals round. Like, I think, because Giannis won it the past 2, before that it was Harden, and then Russ. So yeah, none of those guys went to the finals since Steph Curry in 2016, and we know how that went, and then the year before that. So the first Steph Curry MVP was the last MVP to win the title in that same year. So taking that into account, they should probably announce the award before the playoffs happen, because it tends to be kind of disappointing when the guy who wins the MVP is not playing, when they announce who wins. But I guess that's kind of a side note. But anyway, yeah, just take your time on the MVP, guys. And I think that's about all I have on, this topic for tonight. Like I said at the top of the video, if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, ring the bell if you want to. Leave a comment letting me know what you think about the MVP race. don't give me your MVP pick. I don't really care. Like I said, I just don't. I think it's too early. So just let me know what you think about this topic, and maybe some candidates for MVP if you want to. But yeah, with all that said, I'll see you guys in the next one.